Nick Krall made a gamble last offseason that he is not going to make again this year.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team, your Reds, every single day. My name is Jeff Carr, and I'm a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. I have been podcasting about this team now for 7 seasons, and I'm glad that you're alongside me here today. Locked On Reds, we've got a lot going on because this offseason is going to be super busy, and we're going to be with you all along the way. And on today's podcast, the Reds will be making a change in third base coach, which brings up the idea of base running and the volatile nature of the Reds' performance. We'll discuss that later on in today's show. In a few minutes, I want to break down Nick Martinez's true value to the Reds this past year, but we're going to begin with the qualifying offer and why it's something Nick Krall will not be employing again this year. That's all in today's episode that is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, the Major League Baseball qualifying offer was set the other day at $22.05 million. So if you place the qualifying offer on a player for next season, that's how much they make. And we as Reds fans are pretty familiar with this because the Reds did this with Nick Martinez last year. He made $21 million with that qualifying offer. Nick Krall's not going to do that again. Now, he's not going to do it with Nick Martinez because once a player gets a qualifying offer, they cannot get it again in their career. So he's officially been tagged, period, for the rest of his tenure in Major League Baseball. But Nick Krall's not going to do that. There's only a couple of guys who are eligible, but I kind of want to get into the value of Nick Martinez a little bit later on, but the value of the qualifying offer right now, because initially when the Reds did this, I was okay with it. I thought that there was a bit of a gamble. I thought that it might be a little short-sighted, but I was okay with it because Nick Martinez was so good last year. Last year was the best year, 2024 was the best year of Nick Martinez's career. He had 3.4 wins above replacement according to Fangraphs. That's far better than any year in the past of his career. And Fangraphs takes WAR and changes it into a monetary value to kind of let you know, where was he on the scale of roster and all this other stuff. According to Fangraphs, his performance in 2024 was worth $27.2 million. So essentially, what he had done was worth $21 million and more. The problem was he got paid $21 million in 2025. And contracts in professional sports, not just baseball, but professional sports are very reactionary and not necessarily forward thinking. You see a lot of guys get long-term contracts and tons of money based on what they have done and hoping for what they will continue to do. But I think there were some aspects of the qualifying offer that made sense. He was 33 in 2024, obviously 34 here in 2025. So you're not talking about a guy that's at the pinnacle of his career. He's sort of on the downslope as far as his prime is concerned. And so as good as the performance was in 2024, it's hard to say that he's just going to keep building on that. I mean, pitchers can skew a little bit older as far as where their prime is compared to position players, but I don't believe that what Nick Martinez did in 2024 was indicative of years and years of just crazy success. Now, that's not to say he wasn't getting really, really lucky or anything like that, but I think that placing the qualifying offer on him was the wrong thing to do. Now, let's break down the point of the qualifying offer. It's twofold. Firstly, it's designed for small market teams with uber talented players that they cannot afford, and those guys won't sign here, i.e. in the future with Ellie De La Cruz. They place a qualifying offer on them as this little tag that allows the small market team to recoup draft picks whenever that player signs with another team. And those draft picks depend on what type of team signs them, how big the deal is, all that good stuff. But essentially, this is a way for small market teams to get something back when they lose a guy that they just cannot afford. As much as we can talk about how much we would love to see the Reds spend more money. There's a reason for that. And I want to wait on that conversation. We're going to discuss that a lot more with Steve because there's a great thing out by Forbes that looks at the revenue that a team generates and how much they spend on payroll and all this other stuff. And there's some interesting findings in there to be true. But the qualifying offer is designed to help small market teams in that aspect. On the large market side, the New Yorks and the Chicagos and the LAs of the world, the qualifying offer is designed for them to keep a player that they haven't yet settled a contract of. Like if you're familiar with the franchise tag in the NFL, that's basically what the qualifying offer is to a large market team. These teams generate the revenue capable of absorbing the qualifying offer without too much damage to their ability to build a roster apart from this one player that just got what would amount to $22.05 million this offseason. The Reds aren't one of those teams. So when the Reds use the qualifying offer, it is more of it's more meant for them to give it to a guy who's going to make way more than that anyway. Nick Martinez was not going to make $21 million on the open market this past offseason. I feel pretty confident in saying that. And there were some folks that had that take immediately after the qualifying offer was placed on Nick Martinez. And as much as I wanted to remain on the positive side and say, no, this is a good move, I think I have come now to agree with the folks that said this was a bad gamble, because it was. As good as Nick Martinez was, he was not $21 million good. He did not live up to that value. And we'll get into that in more detail here in just a minute. But because of this, this is essentially like, you think of like auctions or something like that, or maybe you like go to eBay and you're trying to get that one thing. You're a collector and you're trying to get that awesome Ellie autograph card, and you really, really want it. But in your mind, if you're like me at least, you're trying to find the lowest number possible to get that item. That's where the Reds come into this whole free agency and trades and all this other stuff. They're looking for things, but they have to look at the lower end of the value. They cannot overpay as much as we might want them to. And that's what happened here. Nick Krall made a gamble. He overpaid for Nick Martinez, and he lost. And the reason that I think that looking back on that, it's easy to say, okay, the failure of that means that there's a bad taste in Nick Krall's mouth. He's never going to do it again. I don't think that's the case, especially as we get, toward the end of Ellie De La Cruz's rookie contract here in Cincinnati and things like that. He's certainly going to use it then if he's still around by that point. And if that's still a thing by that point, that could be totally different. But I digress. Looking at this offseason, right here, right now, Reds aren't using the qualifying offer. They're just not. There's 3 guys who are unrestricted free agents at the end of the World Series. There's some guys with some options and things like that need to be decided upon, but there's 3 guys that have no options to decide on whatsoever. That's Emilio Pagan, Miguel Andujar, and Zach Littell. You're not giving the qualifying offer to any one of those guys. I get it. Miguel Andujar just mashed lefties. I think there's a really good argument to bring him back. Not for $22 million. Emilio Pagan had a career year, amazing saves, all this other stuff. The Reds are not giving a relief pitcher $22 million. Albeit you could make the argument they did with Nick Martinez, but he made starts as well. It's different from Emilio Pagan. They're not giving Emilio Pagan $22 million next year. And Zach Littell, while he does fill that role, as we've talked about a lot with Nick Martinez, he was not anywhere near as good as Nick Martinez was in 2024. And actually, he was acquired midseason. That's another part of this rule. And so Miguel Andujar is exempt from this as well. They have to play the entire year with one ball club for them to be eligible for that ball club to place the qualifying offer on them. So actually, it's just Emilio Pagan. And then, depending on how the options go, but none of the guys who have options and like Brent Suter and Scott Barlow, they're not getting $22 million for the qualifying offer. So money-wise, the Reds aren't going to use it. Experience-wise, the Reds aren't going to use it this year. They're not putting $22 million on anybody. He lost that gamble last year to Nick Krall, and he has no reason to use it this offseason. But just how good was Nick Martinez last season? Because he came closer to that $21 million than you might expect. The next time that you're going to a sporting event or a live event, concert, whatever it might be, you got to look at Game Time, because Game Time has great last minute deals and they make the ticket buying process so easy. Wherever you are going to, they're going to show you your view from your seat. They're going to show you the all in pricing up front. You don't have to add it to your cart to see the taxes and fees and all that other stuff. No, you see it all when you are looking right at the seat that you want. And so you don't get surprised in the end. Game Time wants to make the ticket buying process so simple. And when you purchase them, they're sent to your phone. They're right with you. It's so easy to access. I usually download them to my Apple Wallet or whatever that be after I buy the tickets, and boom, you're in. It's easy. No fuss. That's what Game Time's all about, making the game buying process easier. You got to check out Game Time today. Download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off your first purchase. So you get some good deals. You know what you're getting into, and $20 off your first purchase. Download that Game Time app today. Use that code LOCKEDONMLB. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Reds. That way you don't miss any of the great Reds content that we've got coming for you all off season long, leading you up to the 2026 season and Boston coming in for opening day. And once we get closer to the season, that'll also include the Reds postcast with Tim Daniel. Got so much content for you all year long here on Locked On Reds. So make sure you become an everydayer. And shout out to those of you who are everydayers. You guys are awesome. So, okay, the qualifying offer, it was a bad gamble on Nick Martinez, but it wasn't like a horrible gamble. It wasn't like they gave him money and he wasn't worth anything at all. Because actually, even though he wasn't a $21 million man, 2025 was still the second best year of Nick Martinez's career, and I would like to see if the Reds could bring him back as long as it makes sense. So let's break this down. He was, according to Fangraphs, he was 2.1 wins above replacement, and they have that around $16 million, $16.7 million to be exact, according to their value metric and maths and all that other stuff. And quite frankly, when you look at the differences between 2024 and 2025, I mentioned the fact that 2024 was a career year. He had never pitched that well in his career. In 2025, he was still super good, but there were three big differences. And they kind of sapped his value a little bit. The first one was a lower strikeout rate. In fact, in 2024, he had a strikeout rate of 7.3 per nine. And in 2025, it was down to 6.3 per nine. He pitched a lot more. He had 23 and a third innings more than he did in 2024. But he had less. He had the exact same total strikeouts, even though he had 23 and a third innings more. It's kind of interesting to see his progression as well, because in 2023, pitching for San Diego, his strikeouts per nine was 8.6 at 110 innings total for the year. Then in 2024, it was at 7.3 at 142 and a third innings for the Reds. And then in 2025, he pitched even more innings and had a lower strikeout rate. We might be finding out that Nick Martinez is a better reliever than starter, but maybe he can be a spot starter in certain cases. It'll just be interesting to see how that all works out. But I mean, he made more starts in 2025 than he had ever made in his career, twice as much as 2024. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to kind of monitor, or not twice as much. It was almost twice as much, 26 compared to 16. But it'll be interesting to monitor and see what that means for his value on the open market. I'd like to see if the Reds could look at bringing him back, because I think he provides a very stable safety net for both the bullpen and the rotation. He doesn't necessarily need to be a guy who is one of your five starters on opening day. But as we have found out over the years, you need more than five, more than six, more than seven, probably more than 8 starters. So you can never have too many of them. And to have a guy in the bullpen that can do that would be valuable. But the lower strikeout rate is a concern. He also had a higher walk rate. Now, it's sort of unfair to point this out because it was so good in 2024. Like, it was almost perfect in 2024. He was that good at limiting walks. I mentioned we talked about this a lot last offseason, but his walk rate in 2024 was 1.1. It's really hard to be better than that. So he doubled it to 2.2. But again, that's still really good. In fact, his walk percentage, league average walk percentage is 8%. He was at 6%. So he's still well better than average at limiting the walks. It's just he wasn't as good at that as he was in 2024. And then he wasn't as lucky with his homer to fly ball ratio. Fangraphs keeps track of a statistic based on every fly ball that a pitcher allows in play and how many times those fly balls leave the yard. He only had 7% of those leave the yard on him in 2024. That wasn't going to continue. That's a very, very low number. League average is somewhere around like 13 or 14%. His came up. It didn't come up to league average, but it was only 10%, but that's still a 3% jump, which meant he saw more home runs and he pitched more innings than he did in 2024. So he gave up more runs just based on the homers allowed. So then you also come to the fact ERA is higher, his FIP is higher, his xFIP, all of the numbers about his ability to limit run production were higher. And while they weren't bad, they also weren't elite. He was a very solid pitcher. And it felt like the Reds had a number of guys that were very solid pitchers. And so maybe that is the reason to not bring him back, because it feels like you have those guys already. But if the deal can make sense, then it would be interesting. Because I think when you're talking about the Reds and their offseason and how they attack certain things and what they need to go after and what it's probably going to take to get all of those things, you do have to understand the economics of it all and how much will it cost and all this other stuff. According to our friends over at Spot Track, his projected free agent value is $14 million per year. And if that's the case, fine. Go make that somewhere else. The Reds can't afford that when it comes to what they should be looking at Nick Martinez's role if he were to return in 2026. If he were to return, his primary role would be out of the bullpen with the idea of being a spot starter. And while he is very experienced at that, and he is very, very good at that, that feels like more of a luxury than a need. And so to spend $14 million on a luxury, it wouldn't be as bad as placing the qualifying offer on him, but it would start to get toward that area. I think what I'm getting at is if nothing else materializes for Nick Martinez and he is still available as we get toward spring training, the Reds should go after him and see if they could get him. I think I'd be happy, $9 or $10 million. But again, that's probably not fair to him. So it's not saying like, oh, go do that right now, because it's possible he does get that $14 million per year in a multi-year contract. As the other part of it, I don't know how long you would sign Nick Martinez for, as he will be 35 next year. Speaking as a guy who's 36 years old, that feels a little bit sacrilegious. But at the same time, like in baseball terms, he's kind of reaching the twilight of his career, as it were. So what do you expect from a guy like that who has seen a lower strikeout rate for the last 3 years, who saw his walk rate bump up, saw his home run rate bump up? Definitely do not go overspending for Nick Martinez. But if it makes sense, I wouldn't mind to see him back. He was good in 2025. He just wasn't that good. He wasn't qualifying offer good. So that's kind of, evaluating players, seeing how they fit in and things like that, because it's easy for us as Reds fans to look at guys who were Reds and say, go get that guy, bring him back, keep him here, make sure he doesn't go anywhere. That was the reason that they put the qualifying offer on him last year. I don't think they need to be overspending to keep Nick Martinez for next year, though. Switching gears a little bit, though, is the Reds saw a coach leave, which has me really curious about the direction of the base running strategy for 2026. If you've been waiting, there's still an awesome opportunity over at FanDuel to get $300 in bonus bets with just one $5 winning bet. If you create your account today and place that $5 winning wager, those are odds you can't find anywhere else. $5 for 300. That sounds amazing. And you can check out tonight's game 7 between the Blue Jays and the Mariners. Man, I think this is going to be classic. And right now, I really don't know who's going to win. I don't have a good feeling about that. Over under set at 7.5, and you got George Kirby and Shane Bieber on the mound. Shane Bieber had a much better start his last time out than he's had in a Blue Jays uniform, so it's hard to predict how this one's going to go. I think I'm taking both Cal Raleigh and Vlad Guerrero to homer. I think both of the key hitters in each lineup are going to hit a home run, and then we're going to see what happens after that. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and you got to check that all out on FanDuel. They've got so many different lines, and especially with football and all that great stuff as well, basketball coming up, FanDuel's the place to be. Download that FanDuel app today. If you can't watch us on YouTube, you can always listen to us on your favorite podcast app. We're on all of them, like literally every single one of them out there today. Also, make sure you check out Locked On MLB Game Night. They're going to have Blue Jays and Mariners covered for Game 7 tonight, and they'll have you covered all throughout the World Series, giving you in-depth looks and talking to the local hosts and getting their perspectives as well. They cover MLB like nobody else can because we are locked on, and that's what we do. So there was a headline last week, and we didn't cover it on any of the shows. I was going to get to it here this week as we look at this. J.R. House is headed for Arizona. He's going to become the third base coach with the Diamondbacks. It's a lateral move, but his reasoning is he lives in Phoenix. He wants to be closer to his family. And so this move makes sense for him personally. And this has not been reported. This isn't part of it. I haven't heard this. This is my speculation. This is just me wondering a little bit. But will the Reds' conservative base running strategy continue next year? I don't think this was a huge part of J.R. House leaving. I mean, quite frankly, you're probably thinking good riddance, third base coach, see you later. Guess what? They're going to add a third base coach that he's going to do something silly, and we're not going to like him either. That's just how baseball goes. Talk to any baseball fan of any team. I'm pretty sure if you bring up their third base coach, they're going to have the exact same thoughts as we do about ours. That's how that works. But I think that there's something to this on the strategy side that I cannot get out of my mind. Because we've been thinking about this a lot throughout the season of, all right, the Reds have been efficient with their base running. They've made less outs on the base, less dumb outs on the base paths and things like that. So that was fun to see. That was something that we had marked as, we wanted to see this in 2025. It's because they ran less as a whole. It's interesting because across Major League Baseball, this was the case. But the Reds ran less than even everyone else did. In 2025, the team that led Major League Baseball in a stat that Baseball Savant has called base running runs was the Milwaukee Brewers. They had total advance attempts at 1,285. In 2025, the team that led baseball in base running runs was the Milwaukee Brewers. Total advance attempts at 636. So literally half the amount. I don't know if that means that Baseball Savant changed how it counted all of this stuff, but it is a staggering number to see. But it's across the board, like cut in half. That was the thing that it was like, okay. And for the Reds' part, they didn't really see a marked difference from the rest of the league in total advance attempts, talking about trying to stretch a single into a double, trying to go first to third, trying to go second home, things like that. What they saw that was disproportionate from the rest of the league was their stolen base attempts. In 2024, the Reds attempted 200. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. The Reds attempted 305 stolen bases. In 2025, they attempted 105 stolen bases. So if there was a point during the year where you were just kind of watching Reds baseball and going, I feel like they're not stealing as much, you're right on. 200 less stolen base attempts year over year. That is a concentrated strategy. That is a conservative move. Like looking at the rest of the league, they did kind of cut their stolen base attempts down, some of them by half, none of them by 2/3. That was a disproportionate move that the Reds made compared to the rest of the league. And whether that's a counting thing or whatever that might be, that's a staggering number. And when you look at the efficiency, the Reds were top 10 in base running efficiency. But the biggest difference was the fact that they were negative. They had a negative value whenever, it was base running runs via stolen bases. In 2024, their base running runs via stolen bases were +5. In 2025, they were -2. So in this case, the conservative nature of their stolen base attempts did not help them. It hurt them. I really hope that's something that they consider next year and they don't just run the station to station thing again back in 2026, because we talked about this a lot. This team doesn't have the power. And as much as we want them to acquire the power, until that happens, they've got to figure out other ways to be creative and score runs. You've got to use your base running acumen. You've got to use your base running talent. And they've got a lot of it on this roster. So why did they get so conservative? They did change managers. Now, again, I mentioned that the entire league seemed to be down as far as the amount of times they attempted to take extra bases and the amount of times they attempted to steal bases. But the Reds were disproportionately down. So with that, I look at Terry Francona. I say, okay, Tito, there seemed to be a strategy there. Is that going to continue? Because if it is, then Nick Krall desperately needs to add power to this lineup. As much as we keep saying that, and we're going to say it all offseason until it happens, they need more power. If they're not going to run, they need more power. Because if you're not going to get creative to score runs and use the base paths, then you've got to have better bats. And there's no more of this. Well, the guys, they're just going to get better. The guys that we have, they're going to get better. There's no more of this because we've been hearing that for 3 years now. Okay, 2 years. Felt like 3 years. Feels like an eternity. We've been hearing it all our lives. Quite frankly, if you're a Reds fan that is around my age, and I mentioned, I just turned 36. So if you're around my age, all you have heard is that, well, the roster is going to get better. They're going to get better. And you might be like me, and in some cases have believed it at times. And I'm still there on some guys, but I'm not there on a collective push forward, a collective forward progression such that they don't need to make moves. That is just a silly idea to think that this team does not need to make moves this offseason. They've got to add power. And if they're not going to run, they've got to do. I've been thinking this all throughout the season. I'm like, man, they're not running as much. I don't know what's happening here. And J.R. House is going home. J.R. House wants to be closer to his family and on the downtime be able to spend more time with his family. That's why he is leaving. He was offered a contract. The report was that everyone on Terry Francona's coaching staff was offered a contract. So nobody was asked to leave. Nobody was fired. Nobody was, didn't get their contract renewed or anything like that. This was a personal decision on J.R. House's part. But I can't help think that the conservative strategy of this team on the base paths had something to do with it. J.R. House was coaching a completely different style year over year. I think there's something to that. I'll be interested to see how that changes up because the Reds, if they're not going to hit home runs, they got to steal bases. That's absolutely evident to me. And I hope it's evident to them, and I hope that they do it next year. I know part of it was, well, Elliott was dealing with something with his legs and all this other stuff. It can't just be one player. They have more players on this team that are fast than he is. And if all of them were dealing with problems, well, then we got to point the finger back to the medical staff. So there's that too. But I know this. They can't be conservative on the base paths like they were in 2025 and expect anything to change in 2026 if they don't add a considerable amount of power to make up for the lack of base running. Because you can't have low power, low base running. You're just not going to score that much. And that's kind of where the Reds were in 2025. I don't know. Before we go, I did see a positive update. Rhett Lowder made another start in the Arizona Fall League, pitched a couple of innings through 32 total pitches. 20 of those pitches were strikes. He's moving along. All reports are that he feels well. And so he should be progressing in the way that we hope to see him in spring training and to see him be a part of this rotation in 2025, because we keep kind of penciling him in. And I know that there's people that ask, like, is he going to be healthy? Reports are right now he's on track. And so that's exciting to see. Also, Cam Collier hitting the cover off the ball out in Arizona right now. 2026 could be a big year for him. We'll see what kind of leap he can make. But that'll do it for us here today on the Locked On Reds podcast. If you are not an everydayer, make sure you become one by hitting the subscribe button right here on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platform, because we're free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. So make sure you make us your first listen every day. Become an everydayer. Really appreciate all of our everydayers out there. Now for your next listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully's got you covered all throughout the playoffs. And then, of course, you got Locked On MLB Game Night covering every game, which right now there's one game, and really for the rest of we're just into the World Series. There'll be one game a night. Man, baseball's almost over. I already miss it. But Locked On MLB has you covered every single day with multiple shows. So make sure you check those out now. But as for me and Steve, when he returns, he's going to be in Ireland the rest of the week. I'll have some guests on with me to talk some Reds baseball with you. But we're going to be with you every single day because we are Locked On Reds every single